Few words about the recent market snapshot project that we conducted for the forum. I've been able to join with a few gatherings of the forum a couple of times in person, and so it's a pleasure to join you again. Roland's going to advance slides for me. So, as Andrea said, this market snapshot, which is a word we use to describe something of a white paper, wanted to take a positive story out of COVID-19 around voice as a lifeline and the transformation of home telephony. Next slide, please. So the origins of this project really grew out of the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, when the DECT forum marketing team started to see a lot of news reports on this dramatic uptick in home telephony. And by that, I mean all forms of calling. And we kind of develop a taxonomy here of 4 different kinds of residential calling. But they and we saw this as an opportunity to really create a storyline that would promote the value of home telephony products and services. And so we partnered together to develop this printed asset that could be used as an industry education tool, as an education tool for regulators, as well as a lead generation tool for various players for the DECT forum. So essentially what we wanted to do is to talk about the COVID-19 driven impact on telephony, on related connected CE products, access, connected health, work from home, and really look at how all of these use cases and market forces were driving this increase in home calling. And so the finished deliverable is really intended to be an objectively written analysis of a market development. And then, of course, DECT Forum sponsored that. And so while we mentioned a few DECT member companies in the report, at the end of the report, there is a big branded section that really tells the DECT story in a powerful way. Next slide, please. So just so you understand, here is the cover shot of the deliverable. I'm sure it's already been distributed to all of you. I don't know how much time you've had to look at it. I'll go over some highlights very quickly. But along with the production of the white paper piece, there's a series of marketing activities that Parks Associates will do on behalf of the DECT forum. So we do a couple of big email blasts. One has gone out. We have another one that's about to go out again. We make the report available as a download on our website. We drive a lot of traffic through our social media and event activities on our website. And so it'll be up on our site for 18 months. Of course, the DECT forum gets to use the paper any way you want, can host it in a variety of places and use it in marketing materials. We will also run advertisements on our various websites for the white paper, and do a lot of social media mentions to push it out. So we wrap a lot of marketing activities to try to really promote downloads as much as possible for the report. Next slide, please. So obviously, as I said in the beginning, we wanted to make a big positive statement about this calling makes a comeback. That is this whole notion that during COVID-19, people who are working at home, schooling at home, being entertained at home, all of that has really driven this uptick in residential calling in all of its forms. And as Andreas pointed out, we recognize that at this stage, we don't really know exactly which of these trends are temporary and which may signal lasting change. We certainly, by the end of the paper, have confidence that certain trends are very much likely to be lasting, such as work from home, the rise of telemedicine, and concern for the elderly and the vulnerable. But the market snapshot takes as its purpose really to explore how telephony is transforming. And this is a key line. I mean, the whole tone of the paper is really to do two things: to provide renewed validation of legacy technologies, right? So we've seen that fixed line telephony in the most traditional sense has been validated once again in the midst of the pandemic. And while also these new technologies are accelerating in their adoption, such as voice over IP and fixed line IP, and the newer forms like that. Next slide, please. So one of the critical pieces of validating this uptick in usage were the various news reports that were coming out of service providers in Europe, in North America, in the US, Canada. And so we really went back and tried to analyze all of the news reports and find the best ones that were really coming from major news sources where the service providers were making some kind of announcements. Most of this happened in April through maybe early June. But one of the things we see across the board is that we found evidence of both increases in call volume and duration for all forms of calling, meaning fixed line, POTS, and IP, voice over IP, Wi-Fi, IP and mobile. Of course, in many countries, we saw that the governments were advising shifts to relieve the mobile network burden. So we saw news out of the UK, Austria, Switzerland, where the government was saying, please use fixed line, use maybe some of these underutilized legacy technologies in order to relieve the burden and the strain on mobile networks. I will say we pretty much had to rely on the published reports with kind of fragmented data points. Most of the service providers, by the time we were exploring it, weren't really wanting to talk about their proprietary metrics. But overall, we saw across the board that this was a trend that wasn't just isolated, that was pretty much in every region that we looked at. Next slide, please. So the snapshot goes into just looking at various drivers and use cases for this uptick in calling. And I think these are going to be pretty obvious to most all of us, but we could kind of validate them some with our own Parks Associates research. We've been conducting a good deal of COVID-19 related research on work at home, on shifts in consumer economic behaviors, on the rise of telemedicine and others. So in this section of the report on the left, we just focus on social isolation and how that's driving this move to voice calling. Of course, we have so many communication technologies available now, from social media to a variety of things. But we found that when push came to shove, that people really were most comforted and most consoled and found most useful voice calling. And so it just really validates the importance of voice. Also, of course, work from home. We've experienced this, all over the globe. In the US, we know that as of May, 30% of US broadband households reported at least one remote worker, and 22% reported another adult working remotely. And this is persisting. And we know from many of the companies that we're studying that they are making long-term decisions now to shift workforce to work from home workers, whether those are tech support, service workers, sales workers, whatever. Overall, we are finding in our own surveys that there's a very high satisfaction rate with work from home. It's not without its problems, but we see that as being a lasting change. Also, healthcare needs. Certainly, the rise of telemedicine has accelerated tremendously, as for a period of time, many people were completely cut off from in-office visits with healthcare providers. And so in the US, we saw that basically usage of telemedicine tripled year over year from mid-year 2019 to 2020. So 3 times as many people were actually using telemedicine. If you look at the call volume, actually it's like 10x. There are many reports. So we certainly see that telemedicine now is here to stay for all of the reasons that it improves access and efficiency and all of that. And finally, elder care and the vulnerable, that there's an intense concern about the vulnerability of elders and others that are isolated. And so voice calling, again, has proven a big driver. Our concern for the elders and vulnerable has turned out to be a major driver to this uptake in voice calling, especially because many elders still use fixed line telephony. And so it just validates the utter necessity of maintaining that infrastructure, or at least carefully transitioning it to IP in a way that brings all of those people along. On the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see very quickly just a taxonomy that we developed for residential calling. Again, we wanted to include the whole story so that we felt like we were objectively telling a comprehensive story and not just kind of a fixed line story. Next slide, please. As we kind of just unpacked developments in these 4 kinds of residential calling, we were able to brief with some DECT forum companies. So we talked with Jabra and Gigaset and Snome and got some reports from them about upticks in hardware purchases and things. Talk a little bit about the transition of fixed line POTS to fixed line IP on the major carriers. And then make a quick mention about mobile only households as just a part of the mix that's important. On the right-hand side, we do set the context of kind of the reality of the context that landline has been declining. It's a well-known fact. And so we kind of compare various European countries to US and Canada, just so we can kind of see where various countries stand with the latest research. I know this only goes to 2017, but that was the most currently available global research that we can find. But the statement is positive, that even amidst this decline, what we see is this renewed validation that fixed line is utterly critical and very important. And of course, we close out the paper with the statement to regulators that whatever you plan as far as long-term strategy for infrastructure, this is just a vital piece that has to be taken care of. Next slide, please. And so towards the end of the paper, we're just really validating the continuing benefits of landlines, all the things that all of you know very, very well. And then we point towards the future of home telephony. So really talking about the future benefits of IP technology as fixed line moves into fixed line IP, and some of the various feature sets that many of you have been working on um, with IP technology. Finally, we just round out with kind of a branded, final slide, please, with a branded section on DECT that tells your story in a visually appealing way. And that rounds it out.